Welcome to Out of the Blank.
Welcome to another episode of Out of the Blank Podcast. Bruce, it's a pleasure to have you on the show, man. Would you please introduce yourself to everyone out there listening?
Okay, I want to start at the beginning. In 1939, the World's Fair. So I was 5 years old, and I got this vision of the future, the wonderful future that awaits us. It was a robot, the pavilions, world of the freeways, and I have no idea that World War II had already begun. So from there, I grew up doing World War II as a kid. My father was head of the air raid wardens, so our trips were being to the right off the coast, so he had to go. He can't be able to cut their lives. I got it. Well, that's just finally on August 14th, 1945. It was Durand had surrendered. So I was in a pickup truck with a bunch of other kids, and we yell our hearts out, peace, peace. So we thought this was it. It's a good war. We won. It's good, wonderful one. And everywhere we went, people were singing in the streets, waving flags. Little we know that already Washington had arranged to divide Korea into two nations. Little do we know that in about a week, Charles de Gaulle, head of France, would come to the United States, and our government would provide 12 troop ships to bring an invasion army to Vietnam. We didn't know. So actually, the Vietnam War and the Korean War had already begun while we were celebrating in the streets. So when our ships went there in the fall of 45, who greeted them? Japanese troops that the British had rearmed. So every single sailor on those ships signed a declaration opposing this. Why have we switched sides? What is going on? I mean, we're talking now 1945. So I didn't know it was a long line. Of course, it took a lot of experience to prepare for this. Was this the good war? My memoir came out a couple of years ago, and I used the good war in the subtitle. And in a way, it was a good war. The bad guys were on the other side. That's clear. But our main strategy in conducting this war was based on fascist theory, the theory put out by General Joy in Italy. The idea is you attack the civilian population, that attacking the civilian population is more important than attacking the troops on the line. So we did this very efficiently. Obviously, in Europe, attacking not only German cities but French cities, and then of course in Japan, we obliterated whole cities before using the atomic bomb.
Or showing our strength at the expense of just innocent civilians.
Yeah, the idea was by attacking these civilians, you prevented the enemy from having a long civilian force that would support the war. This was our strategy in this war. I didn't know what any of this was at the time.
I don't think anybody knew. I think it came out in hindsight later when we found out real documentation on what was going on.
Well, I participated in various conferences with guys who on these ways, and I flew with other guys who had been when I was as a very very long American was a navigator refueling bombers, refueling aircraft that were flying over the Soviet Union. I didn't know that before. So a lot of my mental conceptions of World War II were challenged by what I was seeing in my life. So even before I was flying, I was not a navigator, I was a squadron intelligence officer. Before that, I worked in factories. I worked as a tugboat maiden in New York Harbor. We were about to pick up a barge. I saw something in the water. Turned out it was a corpse with a backhand at the back of the neck, executed by the mafia. So I didn't know less about it. I found this later. What I found was that early in World War II, the Navy had made a deal with the mafia to have the mafia take control of New York Harbor. I say this. I want to just document that.
Was that gun running? Was the purpose of that gun running?
No, it was to keep the workers under control by the mafia. So
that's crazy.
So this is the quote from my book.
Yeah.
The Navy handed the word in 1942, seeking order, discipline, and efficiency. They recruited Matthew Ustrado, who's in jail right now at that time, Aksati, Henry Corvette, Cockeye Dunn, actually, Joe Donatis, Brian Lansky, Frank Turillo, and other mafia to control the workers in the port. This is clearly documented. I'm not making any of this up. I have some sources for this.
It's believable with the organized crime that we learned about with the assassination plots against Castro, that the CIA was working with the mob. But what's the mob's purpose of controlling the harbor and controlling the workers? I mean, is it a fear of making them work faster, work harder? What is the
just to keep order and discipline?
Why are you giving the mob like orders to keep order? That sounds like a counterintuitive right there.
Well, they had an order. So I learned a lot working on the tugboats in New York Harbor, because this was on the waterfront, which is a well done movie, but it's on the wrong side because I go home. So that was before I had really had fundamental doubts about our government, the role, and I, of course, knew something, but a little bit about what's going on, but very little. So there are a lot of things that happened to me in the Air Force that conflicted with ideas that I had grown up with. So one thing was our doing the refueling of these bombers that were flying over the Soviet Union. And I knew because I was working in intelligence in a vault, that the Russians had no capacity to attack the United States. This is the period when kids were supposed to be hiding under their desks because of the
Because of an
Russian
impending nuclear strike. Yeah, I mean, there was so much of this inflation of communism where it was like, but how much of it was actually true compared to how much money did we fund to get whatever we needed for safety or whatever measures to be installed?
Yeah, so this cognitive dissonance in my mind between the guys, the ideas I grew up with and what I experienced. And then we were refueling bombers. We also had practice spaces, and we were refueling B-47 near Buffalo with Booker Curious south of Buffalo. And I was just giving a final correction to the bomber when it blew up. So it was 2 fireballs. So I didn't know anything about these bombers coming up. So I decided to investigate. And this is totally documented. 58 of these bombers blew up in 2 years, or crashed. Why? Because Soviet air defenses were so formidable that they decided that these bombers would fly on the deck and caught, like a firebomb would turn around and lost their bombs. This is what these bombers were practicing. What it meant was that the center wing section was in great stress. If you fly, you watch the wings. They're not stable. They go like
flimsy.
this. So, but not taut spotting. So these bombers were exploding because of the tension on the center wing section. I didn't really. I got something of the picture already because within 1 week before and 1 week after, 2 other bombers. So these bombers, they were the real backbone of SAC during this period, Strategic Air Command. The B-52s were just coming on. They couldn't really rely. So this is one reason that the United States didn't actually attack the Soviet Union in this time and fulfill air attention, because they couldn't count on having a bomber force that could get through. But this is a history that nobody is aware of anymore.
Did they justify what was happening to those bombers when they were exploding? Were they blaming the Soviets, or were they understanding that their own cause of action for trying to implement something that was failing?
So they understood. They realized what was going on, and they grounded those bombers. These little Boeing bombers. We talk about Boeing having problems now.
Yeah.
But I mean, the B-27 at the time, it was like the civilian fleet of two airlines. Right? Could you imagine 58 planes, civilian planes blowing up in 2 years?
Yeah, no, in 2 years, that's crazy.
It took them a little while to figure it out. What they did, they beefed it up, and eventually.
After the second plane, you got to be investigating that. I'm surprised it took that many planes for them to be like, "Hey, what the hell's going on?"
Well, the technical representatives of the airlines, that the air of Boeing were integrated with our
Yeah.
forces. So it was. We had two models in our wing. The second model was supposed to be faster than the first model, but it wasn't. It was slower. So we actually had 4 planes taking up. We had the later ones going first because they were supposed to be faster. But what happened was the 2 other ones were faster than them. So I found that the first mission I was on, I said, why is this? So everything was based on positive. And this is no surprise to you or the other relations.
Yeah.
Right now.
Well, you're being exposed to some of this. I mean, when you're kind of like thinking and you're kind of hearing about what's going on, you're kind of seeing a lot of this stuff for yourself too. At least when you're starting to kind of realize the truth about whatever our connections our government's having, whether it's connections with an airplane organization or industry, or whether it's connections with the mob. I mean, are you having significant doubts on the patriotism that you were kind of instilled with as a kid? I mean, the beliefs that you had as like this. I mean, I had red, white, and blue ideas of America as a kid too. I think everybody believes in. I still believe in cherry pie, apple, whatever, apple pie America. But you kind of realize you got to end up learning a little bit more, and you realize those aren't necessarily true. I mean, there's still ideas that we could ascribe to, but we start realizing that a lot of the deeds that we do are, there's a dark side of how business starts to work a little bit.
Well, dog stride, yeah, is I think. Yeah, I wish I could be was sunny and not talk about the dark side, but here we are we're on a planet that is ideal for us. We evolved for the planet that we see, and we're destroying it. And we have created two threats to our existence as a species. Obviously, climate change. Good. I've been writing about this some already, but the other one I have a lot about. There was no excuse for our dropping atomic bombs on Hiroshima, and certainly not on Nagasaki.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we did that. This was part of what I mentioned before, the Spass's theory of area warfare. Why attack the civilian population? So it's not that those attacks were out of the blue, because we had already incinerated all but 3 of Japanese cities before that. So we wanted a demonstration for various reasons. In fact, Japan had already surrendered, with the one condition would be that they keep the emperor. And also, this is all documented in this book. So we did that, and then we had the opportunity right then and there to ban nuclear weapons. All it took was the United States agreed. Obviously, the Soviet Union didn't want them. No other country wanted them. Only the United States wanted them. We didn't think that the Soviet Union would be able to get nuclear weapons. Well, we went from atomic bombs to thermonuclear bombs. We had an opportunity to ban them all. We didn't take it. So if we imagine all the tremendous intellectual might we put into constructing these weapons, and then compare it to what would it take to ban them, to get all the nations in the world to ban them. It's a much simpler process than actually making these things and applying them.
Well, it's impossible because you're going against human nature. The issue was they should have never, they were never created in the first place. We opened up Pandora's box with that. Now it doesn't matter if you put down your nuclear weapons or if you nuclear ban at all. There's still this idea and paranoia that starts to kick in, which is that nation is secretly doing it behind the backs and breaking the code. I mean, that's been exposed with the Geneva Convention rules. I mean, we had rules not to use biological weapons, but yet we still continue to use biological weapons in the Korean War as well too, even though there was banned rules of not using those in warfare. It's just that every country doesn't care about following the rules. The rules are for the public. The rules make it look like they're following exactly what we want them to do and listening to us when we say we don't want these. But I mean, they even banned chemical weapons and biological weapons faculty or facilities. The expense for those things, they weren't doing it because they realized how dumb it was and how dangerous it was. They were doing it because they were burning a hole in their pockets and budgets trying to store these things and produce these things. And then the public was like, yes, they see the wrong in their actions and clap their hands like seals. And it's like, that's not what it was at all. The government still uses biological weapons. There was just that, was it biological weapon or a chemical weapon attack? Russia, Novichok, on in the UK that happened down there. And it was like, Nobody's seen that in decades. It's like it was a message. It's like that's why there's anthrax attacks and things of this sort. It's good for small confined spaces, but it's a waste of resources if you're trying to implement them on the battlefield. And that's when we get the nuclear bomb. And then that's just like at this point, it's mutually assured destruction that we don't do it. So
When chemical weapons and biological weapons are easy to hide, you can't hide nuclear weapons. You can't manufacture them in secret. You mentioned human nature. Well, it's a huge topic, but we had one try at putting this for the American people, and they overwhelmingly voted against nuclear weapons. That's another story. So most people, yeah, we're capable of some very dangerous and frightening acts, but most people want to live in peace. If we had a vote on that, which we never will, we would vote for
there's
them.
no profit in peace. I mean, look at the Cold War. People go, yeah, it was a time where nuclear destruction was imminent and everybody was pointing nukes at each other. It was like there was still a war going on. It was an intelligence war. They strictly were stealing information from each other. There's never going to not be this interest into what the other country is doing, whether it's America's eyes onto another country's involvement into something or Russia's involvement into the US, or there's always this small back and forth game. And maybe that's just us as species, but there becomes a level where nations start to recognize the total destruction. I think that's what a lot of people see with the nuclear bombs. I think at this point, it's just a bragging thing or a here's my muscle. Let me show you my muscle. It's a nuclear bomb type situation. I've talked to plenty of people, friends of mine who work in whatever this whole nuclear disarmament agreement and things of that sort. They have conflicting issues where they'll bring up rising points that the US has to do these types of things because China is doing the same exact things. They're valid arguments, but you kind of look at the grand scale of what people do necessarily, and it is this factor of like decimation. I mean, I think everyone understands that nobody wants to be the person that goes down in history or whatever is going to be left of history as destroying the whole world if you launch a World War III type situation.
Two aspects I want to talk about is one is this reliance on weapons and our belief in weapons. So another book I write called um, War Stars, not Star Wars, but War Stars. I trace this all the way back to the 18th century, where Robert Stroughton was convinced he had the ultimate weapon, the submarine. He'd been in the submarine, and it was a good submarine.
It's like a redneck in camo. Nobody can see you when you're underwater.
Yeah. So he believed this would end war. This is the ultimate weapon. So in this book, I trace this to the war stars, Fulton, Billy Mitchell, and so forth. Now, one of our submarines, or one of the Russian submarines, has about 146 nuclear weapons. So they have each of those submarines is capable of wiping out the major cities of the country. That's so, but people don't know this. We've come so close so many times to unleashing. I don't think that we're getting into nuclear war by Russia or the United States. Oh, let's attack. It's not going to come like that. It's going to be a misunderstanding of data, which had happened many times. We were so close. So we always in this danger. The people don't know this. Leads to the next thing. I am basically a cultural historian. That's what I do. I go into the culture. And see, well, if you want to understand how our view of reality works, you have to go into your own mind. But you can't do that because where's the culture? Your culture is in our heads. So I was teaching in lecture. One night it was in fall gathering with Japanese professors. And so we were very interested in this belief that the POW has become an icon of militarism. How does this work? This really puzzles us. We look at the movies and it doesn't make sense. Because when militarism was dominant in Japan, the last person who would be put forward as a positive incarnation of this with the POW. What did he do with this? So how does this work? So when they asked this, I was absolutely flummoxed. I had just never considered this. The irrational emphasis. So I said something. So I went back home and I looked at the Bible and said, I need to look at these movies again to see what's going on here because it doesn't make sense. But right now, we're talking. This flag is all over the country. You know, nobody has said anything against the POWs. When I went and looked at the movies again, I realized this whole belief, you know, the POWs, the one after the war, they returned them all, except one. So how does this make sense? And I realized that the belief has all kinds of other aspects. If you look at Rambo, this figure, this is the second Rambo movie, is an incarnation of Sylvester Stallone. And it's attacked on feminism, bureaucracy, all the factors that a lot of people feel are impending on their daily lives. That's what's really going on here. And if I in my book, I go into the reading of the movies and the beliefs. Is a revelation to me. I make the book a whole lot better, in my opinion. But really, what it taught me was that the culture is in my mind. I mean, I'm an American. So I have all kinds of beliefs that I haven't examined that I assume are just true because they're part of the culture. I'm not a Martian. I'm American. So once you realize this, you go into your mind and say, well, why does that make sense? Why do I believe this? Why do I accept this the way the belief works in American culture? And if you go back and you trace the rise of what we call Trump, you go back to Perot and this issue, and it's really it leads to very unsettling questions, but also a lot of knowledge about how people's minds work, how the culture works.
Well, it preys upon some of the basic factors of people that whenever it's kids or whenever it's someone that is identified either as American to Americans or someone of your culture, your, I guess, people that like an average citizen, POWs, for instance, prisoners of war, people being tortured, we have to do everything to make sure we stop those tortures. And a lot of times in film representations as well, too. I mean, they're killing people, but we see it as like they're killing the enemy. So it's like an enemy is a human being, a human species, keeping that kind of understanding. And it's obviously not every culture views it like that. They kind of view it as an enemy too. So it's not just us, but it is like these things of how in films, prisoners of war. I mean, Lone Survivor was basically a sign up at your local recruitment station film. At least for me, it was. It was like, let me show you how badass we can be attacking terrorisms, and I had to question what that word meant. And it's kind of like trying to understand, like, what are we ingrained with as a society compared to what other cultures are ingrained with as a society. I mean, everyone's got their own conservative, brainwashing country style ship towards their nation. And I think when you kind of look at it from a bigger context, you start to notice it more. I mean, POWs are not just prisoners. They're people that are used as pawns in many instances. Anything the public, if you want to justify an action that you want to do, invade another country because you might have left someone over there, the public will be 100% in support of the military doing that. I mean, the biggest question ever is, why does every president say they support the troops? It's like, yeah, get the troops on there because there's this large patriotic thing. Of course, the troops have to agree. I know plenty of troops that don't like their president and don't agree with anything that the president says. And it's like this idea of, well, the troops are on their side. And it's like, same with farmers. I mean, farmers are backbones of America. It's like, do we really treat them like they're the backbones? Because we sure as hell don't. And it's kind of like, you start understanding, I guess, the myths or the legends that get told out there. Um, and you kind of just you see it for what it is. I mean, I wouldn't say it's a pessimistic view, but I also just don't believe living in a fantasy as well either. I think movies have done a great part to display a fantasy idea of even the Vietnam War. Whenever I watch a Vietnam War film, I don't feel happy. I don't feel sad. I just feel confused. Like, what the hell went on over there? You know what I mean? Like, do we fully understand it? I think people are still finding out new things about it today.
Well, this over here,
Yeah, a lot of books.
this one is all, but this is all but like every book is there. It's about the war, but still, why now do we still venerate the POWs rather than the dead ones, the wounded ones, the ones who haven't been able to just,
Well, how many
why?
goose chases have we been on trying to find someone who's missing in action? You know, this idea that they could still be alive. I mean, there's resources that get expended, and I don't want to leave anybody behind, but I also don't agree with being over there sometimes in the first place. And it's like it's hard to justify those types of things.
I've talked to a lot of POWs. None of them believe this.
What, that MIA is real?
That any was left behind. They know no one's left behind.
I'm about to say, don't they have like a book that they keep track of where it's like this guy, he's on here, he's on here, he's on here. I hate to say it like that, but I mean, what was that movie? Not movie, a recent operation that just happened. They called it Pineapple Express about getting those troops that were abandoned over there and bringing them back over. I mean, that could be real. I believe that, but there's like this large amount of like anytime in a movie, it's like the dude went missing in action. We have to go find him. I'm like, what's the likely chances that he's dead? Or if there is this missing in action thing, I mean, I don't know. I don't put it above the government to create a false narrative just so we can go back in to do something.
The first time I spoke publicly on this issue, it was a college uniform, big orange one. It was filled with guys with POW flags. And so one of the speakers was a bird turtle with all on his chest. And he was presenting the government position, which is we don't know. It's not that we know that someone bad. We don't know. My position was there's no way we could not know. We have so many sources of intelligence. We know one way or the other. But the government keeps this ambiguity alive for a particular purpose. So it will,
Do the POWs you interviewed believe that as well too?
yeah, they don't know it's love left.
Because that's a big cultural thing about us is that there's this idea of missing in action people. So like that's like shattering Santa Claus isn't real to a bunch of people.
I was at a conference in Vietnam, and the American ambassador had a reception at his house. He was a POW. He was a pilot, and I had a chance to talk with him. We got our wings the same year, actually. So I said, "What do you think of this?" He said, "It's a hoax. It's a hoax. That's what it is."
Jesus.
He was very frank about it. He knew that. So that's I,
That's a dark freaking thing for our government to do. That's just I'm just laying that out there.
well, he was very good at fostering American Vietnam friendship. Um, um, let's talk about a sunny side.
Let's go ahead.
It's not really a sunny side. This is another of my a book that came up at Frankfurt was the course Frankfurt class course called "The Most Important Fish in the Sea." It's about menhaden. So I'm not blind to the reality of the ocean, of the plastic, overfishing, all the things. But this is a story that nobody is aware of. A mass movement was organized on the East Coast to get rid of the fishery that was destroying all the fish people like to catch. They're looting menhaden, which is the keystone fish of the whole Atlantic and the Gulf. And we had a mass movement that's still going, and we basically got rid of the industry. It's now what's left of it is run by a foreign company, and the change that we brought about, and it's these people all over the place. Most of the people active were working class Americans. Probably I would guess was a half of a vote for Trump, but that's by the point, because most of these guys facing the separate, they wanted to be there for their kids, for their grandchildren, and they were really accurate. And Greenpeace was also involved. So it explains the whole perspective. So now, a couple of facts. In the New York, New Jersey bite, before this, we were seeing every year about 5 humpback sightings in a whole year. Now they're over close to 300 named sightings. We know that they're marked into the the waters are clean. The fish are thriving. We restored the marine environment beyond anything that I could imagine. It was like now we have humpback whales sometimes swimming up the humps. And unbelievable. I saw it with my own eyes. The humpbacks feeding on the menhaden, who were now, instead of being pulverized and turning to the bodies, they're feeding the fish and cleaning the waters. But of course, menhaden basically are cleaning the waters. So it's just a wonderfully inspiring story. It says what can be done. And it's not a dark story, it's a sunny story.
That's a good story, but I want to go back to the missing in action thing. That you can't just drop that on me and then tell me a positive story. We got to. So the POWs that you did interview, I mean, so this is this common? Like, is this just not really told? Like, what was your idea of America after that, after realizing this myth of like the missing in action people?
Well, I realized this is something that is sponsored by the government. The
Yeah.
government the government could clear this up if they wanted to. It's across the spectrum. It's not left or right. So a lot of leftists believe this. The government is hiding all these MIAs who are left there. The people who were MIAs, they had a very good uh, communication system among themselves. They kept track of the people who were captured, and there were two groups of people who were captured. Most of them were flyers who its planes were shot down, and they were captured, like McCain. But there was another group of enlisted men, and the enlisted men who were POWs, a lot of them wanted to stay there. And Vietnamese said, "Why you want to stay here? Go home."
That's Munchausen syndrome, isn't it? Or was it? Yeah,
These were ground troops as opposed to air codes.
isn't it like a lot of POWs they experience like a type of attachment or something like that when they're kidnapped for so long? I'm sure a lot of them do want to go home, but there is like this I wouldn't say victim mentality, but it's I think it's called Munchausen syndrome. If I'm not mistaken. It's like you adopt like some type of connection to the people that are holding you captive. Like you end up not wanting to escape. It's weird.
Well, eh, these guys just learned the history of the war. It's a war. We get back to why were we doing this?
Nobody knows. I don't think we still know today.
What was the purpose? Well, I mentioned Duval in 45 arranging for the United States to transport a French army, including not a French, but captured German troops, including Waffen SS. Um, why were we doing this? What was the purpose?
You just got to say America and move on. That's like the justification for so much stuff is that apple pie America attitude. I don't know. I mean, God damn, that missing in action thing is freaking me out, man. You don't know how many movies. I keep thinking of the movie Five People You Meet in Heaven with about the Vietnam War, and they're talking about like the dude had regrets that he thought his friend that he was looking for in the Vietnam War is still missing, and it's like I don't know. Sorry, I'm ranting. I gotta look more into that MIA myth out there. I can tell you that much. If I have to speak to a POW, I will, but I need to get that. I need to figure that out.
Well, I mean, I was very active against the war. I was fired from Stanford.
You were fired from Stanford?
Yeah, I had tenure. I was blacklisted. I, my wife and I have given thousands of FBI documents to the University of California, Berkeley, FBI doctors and CIA doctors about us, all the lies, all the they tried to trap me with women, weapons, drugs, everything they tried. Nothing worked, but they still they fired me from giving speeches about Stanford's involvement with the war. And I was blacklisted. I
What
went
what was Stanford's involvement in the war?
on everything, everything. um, I've written about that. It's that. Um, so I couldn't get 11 years fired, blacklisted. So I went to junior college on GR Bill and got a certificate in a wine rental horticulture. FBI went around to landscape companies and greenhouses to keep me from getting a job in horticulture. Like
Wow.
I'm going to subvert the butchers. So it was pretty painful. I was unemployed for about 3 years. I tried everything to get a job.
Well, you've made some great books, and that's respect to you on that one. Still sticking by your convictions on things as well too.
Yeah, 20 books.
That's a lot, man. I haven't even written one, and I don't think I want to attempt writing one. I could tell you that the hassle I hear from authors.
Yeah. Well, yeah.
But Bruce, I appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show, man. Seriously, it's been a pleasure chatting with you. Is there a place where people can find your links? Yeah, website? I'm gonna link it all in
Yeah,
the
yeah.
description.
Yeah, okay. My website is H. Bruce Franklin, no punctuation. So it's hbrucefranklin.com. That's it. And you go there, you see books. I have hundreds of articles, blah, 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 and all kinds of stuff. It's hbrucefranklin.com.
I'm gonna link it all in the description so people will be able to click on it and go find your books and see some of the stuff you wrote as well too. Appreciate the time you gave me to talk on my show, and thanks everybody for listening to this episode of Out of the Blank Podcast.